Okay, so a couple things coming up. So first things first is that we do have a break coming up, not next week, so we still got stuff going on next week, but the week after that, from April 29th through May 3rd, so that Monday through Friday. I won't be releasing any new curriculum. There's not an expectation for you to be working on anything. So kind of know that that's kind of there. We actually get, and I think I might have mentioned this to a couple of you already, if I haven't mentioned to the whole group, is that we actually will be starting project week starting next week. And normally for project week, we would have 2 weeks where basically it's dedicated just doing project, no new curriculum. The study groups are just basically office hours. So there's nothing like new in that sense. Like we'll have study groups, but like they're more like office hours where you guys can come in, just basically ask any questions as a group or, individually. If no one really wants to show up, I'll just keep it up and like I'll do work or whatever. But just know that they're kind of like, that's what that time is available for. And that'll be for 2 weeks. So all of next week, and then it would have been the week after. But because of a break in there, kind of a weird kind of situation in the sense it probably helps you guys out more than anything because yeah, we have a break, and basically is that you essentially will have like 3 weeks to complete the project. Now, I want to make it really clear is that like, I'm not expecting you guys to use the break as part of your project. I'm not expecting because you have a break, you have a 3-week equivalent project, if that makes sense. I'm just saying is that that time in between, because it's smack dab in the middle of our project week or project weeks, you'll have that opportunity to get into it. So just so you kind of know that's there. And then also, if you guys kind of feel like you're falling behind a little bit, that's a good time to actually, try to catch up in that sense. And we'll talk about Section 12 in a second. But Section 12 is a lot of like, it's important to go through it, but it's got the beats of what you'll do for the project. And so it's a good thing to kind of like, you can almost think of it like Section 12 is prepping you for the project itself. Okay. So that's something I kind of want to talk about. Oh, hi, Ala. You just missed it. We have a break coming up April 29th to May 3rd. Just wanted to bring that up. So anyway, that will launch us into Project Week. And we'll talk about that more today, but I wanted to bring that up early on so then you guys all know. Any questions about the break? Anything you guys are wondering about that, how that works?
So you mentioned that you're not releasing any new material during that time. Does that mean you're going to be releasing material before then?
Yeah, so because you guys are in Project Week, there wouldn't normally be material to be released. So I should have made that clear. Which you guys now have access to the project, so you guys can start looking at that now if you're done with Section 12 or you want to peek at it, take a look. I think some people have already done that. Just know that there won't be any new material. There also won't be any study groups or office hours during that week. So I won't really be around in that sense. I'll be around on Slack, but I won't be like actively, looking at Slack, kind of deal. But of course, you're welcome to keep using Slack. And if you guys want to, for example, continue doing the daily stand-ups during, break, if someone wants to start that, there's no issue there. But again, the expectation is not that. The expectation is kind of like more like a spring break. It's like, well, you have it kind of in the middle of like, your university classes, like maybe, like, for example, like you put something on Slack and something dire, maybe I'll step in, but don't expect me to be there necessarily, if that makes sense. But of course, you guys are welcome to keep working and stuff like that. Or you can take it easy, take a breather as much as you need, vacation time kind of deal. I would show it to you guys right now, but Learn right now is doing kind of weird stuff when I switch cohorts. So just know if you go to learn.co, the main dashboard, you guys know what I'm talking about, hopefully. But in the main dashboard and you scroll all the way down, there's a calendar on there, and that actually shows, I'll put the holidays and like, especially the breaks and the project weeks. So on there, it should say now, I actually don't remember what it says. But
yeah, it's on there.
Okay, good. So yeah, it'll show that there's a break in there, and then also show that, it should show that there is, let's see here, I think I can study groups. No, wait.
It shows, yeah, office hours, study groups, the breaks, the due dates for the projects.
Perfect. And so we'll talk a little bit about the project in a second, but I kind of wanted to mention those few things, is that there's a break coming up and it's in the middle of project week. Don't feel that you have to do the project during that week. That's not the expectation. You're welcome to. Like if you feel like, hey, I got all this time right now, I don't have to listen to Victor this week. I can go ahead and just like work all the way through. And you want to do the project, that's totally up to you. But just know that we'll have that week after just to keep working on the project. Okay. Just wanted to bring that up then. All right, and then a couple other things then. Oh, any other questions about break in general?
When we get to module 2, I'm thinking far ahead, but that's not going to be released until afterwards, or?
Yeah, that won't be. So the way it'll go is that next week will be project week. Then we have our break. And then the week after break is project week again. And then on that Friday, after we come back, then I'll release mod 2.
Okay, so essentially whenever mod 1 is due. So there's no, so we don't have to think about any of that. Okay, cool.
Yeah, that's the idea. It's like, hopefully you're done with your project by that Friday, or at least pretty close to being done, so you can get ready to go into mod 2 for the following week. All right, and I'll go through some details after that too. Any other good questions though? Any other questions about break in particular? I think that's pretty much it, right? Okay, cool. All right, there's a couple other things I wanted to bring up. So one is, I think I sent, I can't actually remember if I sent you guys for GitHub. I've been putting the, what's it called? Our different notebooks and stuff that I'll kind of like go through during the sections. I've been putting that into like one GitHub repo. And then actually it's not just for you guys, it's also for other cohorts. So I have 2 other cohorts now. So the full-time, so I know there's other mods. But if you want to look at the one specifically for, let's see here, for the project, I just sent it through the Zoom chat. That's where I keep updating things. And so that's, if you see, for example, our different repositories or different notebooks I've been doing throughout the time, you can look at there, you can go through mod 1 and you should be able to find the ones that we talked about. Of course, there's the student resources spreadsheet. You guys all know what I'm talking about with the spreadsheet, right? With all the student resources. Okay, some of you guys are looking at me kind of, thumbs up if you know what I'm talking about. Okay, cool. I want to make sure. Some of you guys look like a little confused. I'll make sure to Slack it out again. Of course, that one has not just stuff that I have, but also the other instructors. So if they came up with other videos and stuff, there's also a great one from Raphael that he actually does kind of like a kind of like what you would do while you're starting up the project. And he kind of does a walkthrough and kind of like logically says like, you know, how you would go about investigating and kind of a little bit of cleaning. And that's on the resources. I'll make sure to Slack that out too. And we'll talk about it next week for sure. But I wanted to share about that so that you guys have access to it. Then also going into that, I went ahead and took the recordings we had for our group for our mod 1. So I think that ends up being from section 5 to basically will be today, right? I put that on a YouTube playlist. So there's the same YouTube video recordings I had before, but I figured that might be a little easier to kind of navigate through. And I try to put them in chronological order. So I'm sending that on through Zoom chat, and I'll send it through Slack too. But it's the same videos before, but that way you guys, if you guys want to look over it again, say, oh, we talked about this during a study group, you can check it out there as you're doing the project. So cool. Any questions on either of those things about the resources, YouTube videos, the GitHub repo?
No, I just pinned it to our channel topic, so at least it's
perfect.
The URL is there for everyone.
Awesome. So good. So that way you guys can reference it. Just remember, Slack disappears after 7 days or 6 days, whatever it is, basically after.
I think I put it on the topic for the channel, so it should always stay there. It just
perfect. That's awesome. Thank you. I need to use this more. I always forget certain Slack features and everything. And again, they're all in the resources too. So perfect. Okay, cool. So those are the few things I wanted to talk about with how you can get your resources. There's one last thing. I put together a like a feedback survey, kind of like, so to get a feel, like, so I've been doing, we've been doing this for over a month now, right? Going into doing these study groups and stuff. And so I'd love to hear your guys' feedback on, like, if there's anything I could improve. So don't feel like, first of all, don't feel like I'm going to try to like hunt you down, like, oh, someone said they only liked it, a little bit, and like, oh no, I don't really care in that sense. Like, I care about getting the feedback, but I'm not going to be, you won't hurt my feelings. You are super critical of me. I'm okay with myself. So, but anyway, I'll send that there, and then I'm sure Yasmin by now will post it on Slack for me too, because she's super cool. Note that the survey can be kind of long. I try to break it up so that way you don't have to like do the whole thing, but there's a week kind of review. And then if you want to talk about a specific study group that we had, you can do that. And there's a little surprise at the end. Not really a surprise. It's not a big deal. Don't look for the surprise. It's not a big deal. But
so
anyway,
it's not money.
It's not money. I won't ruin it. I don't want to spoil anything. You'll have to take the survey to find out. Ooh. All right. So anyway, it'd be helpful if you do that. It just helps me kind of figure out things for like mod 2 I'm going into it. Okay. And of course you can always tell me in person. I don't care either.
Is it like a Google form or?
It's just a Google form.
Okay.
Yeah. And again, when I say don't care, I do care. I just don't mind if you say things that like might hurt my feelings, because I know you won't hurt my feelings because you guys are also so nice. No. Anyway, so okay, cool. Survey, break coming up, YouTube playlists, student resources, GitHub repo, all good. Cool. Any questions about any of that stuff I just talked about? All right, awesome. So that leads us into what we'll talk about today. And this is supposed to be more like mod 1 section 12 study group, but because it's so closely tied to the project, I'm going to tell you about the project. That just makes more sense to me. Oh, someone missing. Sorry, I don't know if you guys saw what Eli just put on Slack. Do you guys miss him? Of course you guys miss him, right? Yeah. I don't know if I told you guys the first time I recorded, I think it was us. We mentioned Eli and I sent him just one snippet like right at the end of us talking about him. I like messing with him. Not messing with him. A playful banter with Eli. Anyway, yeah. So anyway, I forgot what I was talking about. Oh, project. So let me go ahead and just go ahead and share my screen because that would be the easiest way. And okay, there we go. All right. So again, the schedule's on the bottom. This isn't us. Learn right now is giving some issues, so I'm not worried about that. So talking about the project, okay. So in the project, we kind of mentioned this really early on. Like this is literally like the first section. We talked about our data science life cycle, right? And I think we've seen this a few times now. And basically, what you should think about is when we're doing this project, we're really just talking about one aspect of the data science life, or not one, sorry. It's a data science life cycle, but like we've removed a few parts to make it a little bit easier and more palatable for the project. So basically, like our first part is our business understanding, right? Basically, like what's the question? You know, like what are the things that we need to like look at to observe? We're giving you that. We're doing that for you. We're saying like, okay, this is the question we want to know. Okay, in later projects, especially your capstone, you'll decide what you want to do to like what kind of questions you want to ask. Okay. But for this first one, we're really kind of like saying, okay, like we're going to saying what things we want. Next part is like data mining. That's usually like gathering the data, figuring out what data sources you need to use. We're kind of doing that for you too. In this case, it's just going to be one source, your CSV file. That way you don't have to worry about getting any information. So you don't have to worry about querying a SQL server. You don't have to do any web scraping. I don't think we talked about web scraping, but like anything like that, we don't have to go gather that data for ourselves. It's provided for you guys. That way it's a little more palatable for this first project, okay? So what that leaves us is basically the data cleaning, data exploration, feature engineering, predictive modeling, and then our data visualization. And we do kind of loop back into our business understanding, which is basically like saying like, you know, all right, you did all of this stuff, you did some visualization, predictive modeling, why should we care? Like, what's the point of it all, okay? And so we'll kind of walk through this a little bit, but I just wanted to emphasize is that your data cleaning and data exploration, that's probably gonna be the majority of your time during this project. Expect to, I would say what I've seen is about 60%, maybe even more of your time spent in data cleaning. And your data cleaning can basically be going back and forth from doing exploration, you know, and you say, oh, wait, you know what? I need to do this. Like, all right, doing exploration and like, you know what? I need to clean this up. You go back to data cleaning, doing that. All of these areas are very fuzzy in the way that you can proceed. There's nothing set in stone being like, once you go through data cleaning and you're done, or like, you know, you're done with data cleaning, you can't go back to it. You'll probably go back to it every once in a while, okay? But just know this is kind of like what the project is. So if you imagine what are we doing in the project, it's really steps 3 through 7, and then we're kind of going back, looping back around into the first step. So like that kind of gives a good picture of what's going on, right? So talking about the project though, this is, you guys might have seen it now on Learn. Basically, it's just the project module here. It does mention to fork from here, but I think I talked to you guys before. It's like if you're going to make this kind of like part of your portfolio, it might make more sense to create a new repository. I don't know if you guys remember me talking about that. And if you guys are having trouble figuring out how to do that, we can talk about it for office hours next week. But basically, you would create a new repository up here, new repository, and basically go through those steps. And the important part though, because you're making your new repo, the big thing you'll need to have is this CSV file, this kc house data.csv. So if you are making a new repo instead of forking, make sure you download that and add that into your repo. That way you actually have the data. That's how we're able to actually do any of the project. Again, I think I said this before. The reason why I say maybe don't fork this one, especially for the project, is because if you do commits on it, which this is an actual project, this is something that you could show off, right, for your future employer or for recruiters, it's stuff to see. If you do commits on this project, which you probably will have quite a few because you're going through this whole thing for over 2, possibly even 3 weeks, you want those kind of, I think you should have those commits show up on your profile. And if you do it from a fork, those commits don't show up unless they merge it, which of course, they're not going to merge your stuff that you did specifically for the project onto the learn.co curriculum. So the best thing to do, I think, is just to essentially make a new repo that's called, you can call it module 1 project. You can call it something more fancy. For example, I think something Boston, no, it's not Boston. King County house sales. Like you can name it however you want that makes it more descriptive of what you're going on and basically what the first thing people will see. So just kind of do that. And if you need help, Slack it out. We can talk about it during office hours too, when we talk about it after this weekend, okay? So anyway, what the project is gonna involve, and I don't know how many have actually read through this at all, but you can basically expect about almost 50 hours, which if you think about what that is, that's why we do 2 weeks. Basically, our 2 weeks that we normally would have had for 4 total sections, instead what you're gonna be doing is basically putting all that time instead into your project. So even though we don't have any new curriculum, new study groups that we're going over new curriculum, don't think this like, oh, this is really easy. It will take you probably about 40 to 50 hours. That's pretty realistic. So be aware of that. And the big thing, like it mentions here, like if you're getting into 30 hours and don't have the data imported, obviously that's hyper really. If you are having trouble getting the data imported, definitely Slack out. If you're having trouble trying to figure something out, Slack it out to either just me if you just want to ask me, but honestly the best thing to do, and you guys are pretty good at this, just Slack it out on the whole channel for you guys to kind of talk to and help each other out. There's nothing wrong with you guys helping each other out for this project, as long as it's your own work, that's the important part, okay? But basically that cleaning part, I would expect at least like the first 3, possibly even 5 days of doing the full data cleaning. And data cleaning, again, is going to take that most amount of time. You're going to do the exploration then to figure out what those parts are. And then once you have that, that's when you can start getting the bigger meat. Saying, okay, let me look at what features I want to look at, how to do predictive modeling. In this case, we're just doing linear regression. We haven't learned any other new techniques really for predictive modeling, right? And then we're not doing any hypothesis testing. So really your predictive modeling, that's part of the data lifecycle, is really, that was at number 6 right here. That's really just linear regression. That's kind of what you're doing, all right? And then we'll talk about the next parts in there. So that's the general idea. That's what your project looks like. There's basically 3, and it really, in a sense, before, but there's 3 main parts of this project, and all of it together is a project. So the first part is what you're probably gonna spend the most amount of time on. It's gonna be your Jupyter Notebook. So basically it's your Jupyter Notebook of going through and doing the whole data science process, basically going through cleaning into your exploration, and then from your exploration to feature selection, predictive modeling, and then your final visualization. That will kind of like be your overall like stuff. So this is gonna be the main meat of what you're gonna do. But after you do your Jupyter Notebook, which again is gonna be quite long, quite large, You'll then have another part of your project, which is a presentation. And this presentation is basically like, you can think of it like you're like giving a high level idea of what's going on in your project. So you can think of it like you're talking to someone non-technical. So this could be another department, in the scenario, like maybe you're the data science department or data team, and you're talking to the sales team and saying, what things we need to focus on or whatever. Or it could even be, you can think of it as talking to another company and trying to convince them to use your predictive modeling and say, these are the insights we have. So that's the kind of idea you can think about it. This will be like about, I think it's in the thing, it says about 10 slides total. And basically it's going to be I should say the whole assessment, that first part is going to be like a 5-minute presentation. So very, very quick, but also, informative. A 5-minute presentation of like what these non-technical aspects are going to be like, or like, so your insights. You can kind of say very briefly, like generally what you did. For example, you can say if you remove let's say you remove certain features, like, oh, I removed this feature because there wasn't very much data in it. So just want to let you know that we are only predicting on these features right here. You can like slip in if you want, like linear regression or something along those lines, but note that you shouldn't say, oh, linear regression, and then explain linear regression to them. That's not really like the idea here. You kind of are saying, oh, I did predictive modeling and here's my insights. That's the big thing that you want to emphasize in your in this part of the presentation. So expect about 5 minutes to present. And then after that, basically to kind of, I don't think I made this clear, but when you do your assessment will be like basically to me. So like, I'll be like essentially your grader, right? And it'll be like about a 45-minute long session total. So this first like 5-10 minutes will be about your non-technical stuff. And you do your 5-minute presentation. And then I kind of like maybe ask you some questions after that 5 minutes, kind of like wearing the hat of someone who's non-technical, those kind of questions and stuff like that. All right. And that will be the first part of your assessment. And then your second part of your assessment basically will be a technical piece where you basically will go through your actual Jupyter notebook. You can kind of think of like you're talking to either like your data science manager or the data science team, people who are familiar with what you're doing, like the tools, I should say. So you don't have to explain like, oh, linear regression, linear regression is this. You can say, oh, I use these features for this reason, and kind of explain those parts, kind of walking through, relatively quickly through your Jupyter notebook. And just note that I might like, say, oh, like, why do you do this part? Or like, oh, can you go back to this part? Or, hey, have you looked at any other features? So you might kind of skip around a little bit. So it's a little less like of a presentation, more like kind of a walkthrough of what's going on. Okay. So those are 2 big parts of your actual project. And those are the parts that are actually going to be like during the assessment. So like during that 45-minute period with me when we're talking and stuff like that. Okay. So just keep that in mind. And then the last part is your blog post. And so your blog post basically, and notice that it says pick one element of the project. And then you're going to write about that. And so you should write your blog post as a technical thing to other data scientists. So you can think of it gearing it towards, your peers, basically everyone in this cohort. You can think of it even to like other data scientists who are looking to like get into the field and stuff like that. About 800 to 1500 words. So nothing super long, but enough to get some meat into it. One thing I would strongly suggest is make sure you hone in on one specific part of your project. Like this talks about EDA or exploratory data analysis. You can talk about your feature selection. You can talk about visualizations that you did. Whatever you feel that you can talk the most about and write, and then you feel confident enough to actually explain that. So one thing, a couple of notes on the blog post itself is that don't feel that you have to be an expert in it to explain it. It's not required in that way. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be something that you're explaining. And this is going to be something you're going to put out online. So, which can be kind of scary, I think, for some people. I don't know about you guys, but for me, I always go like, ooh, putting it online, I immediately think it has to be perfect. I get really worried. I'm like, am I saying the right thing? Is someone going to correct me the wrong stuff? For the most part, I've noticed in my experience is that the data science community is very open and very communicative and very like open for beginners and stuff like that. So just know that you can kind of go in there and you don't have to be perfect, but talk about the stuff that you want. And obviously, you're still putting your best foot forward. you're trying to still show like what you know. And of course, if you are curious and you're just like, oh, like I'm not quite sure, you're welcome to like ask each other with each other, maybe share each other's blog posts with each other, like some drafts. You can also ask me about it. You can ask your friends and family. That's always a good thing too, just to see like your general, like how you're discussing things. But it should be a technical blog post. Okay. And that one, again, it's part of your project, but it won't be during the assessment, if that makes sense. So you're not going to have to present your blog post, if that makes sense. Okay. All right. So any questions on what I kind of really quickly went through these 3 different parts? Okay, cool. All right. So again, read through this through the curriculum it's only 1 page, one lesson for the project. And that's the general idea. There is one thing I do want to point out. So I'm kind of going through here. Again, you have your technical piece, you have your non-technical piece, you have your blog post, and there's a new part which I don't actually see it showing up here now. So I'm wondering if this is not the updated one. This is probably not updated. Okay, anyway, no, it's in there. Okay, there's one part in there that's kind of hard to miss, and it's a relatively new part. That's why I'm letting you know, is that you guys will be doing a video walkthrough, and so you'll record yourself basically doing a walkthrough of the non-technical piece, and you can think of it like about 5 minutes, maybe even less than that. And just know that this way it's kind of like showing a little bit of your non-technical piece and kind of explaining everything going on. Hey, Eli.
Hey.
How's it going?
How dare you guys don't miss me? So I wanted to just crash it.
Is that what they're saying? I didn't encourage any of that, so I don't know what they're talking about.
Victor, why do you even think I would believe any word of that?
What? Come on. Oh wait, is this being recorded? They might know now. Okay. All right. You don't have to.
It's being recorded.
You're fine.
I just miss you guys. I miss Griffin. I miss Bonnie. I miss Yasmin. I miss Kevin, Adam, Ala, Joshua. I just miss you guys. So I just wanted to crash it.
Well, we miss you too, Eli. You're always welcome to come in on our sections.
Thank you, Victor. I'm going to shut up and I'm going to just listen.
All right, cool. Yeah, so anyway, I was just talking about the new piece is basically a video walkthrough. So what you'll do basically is a quick recording. It doesn't have to be perfect. I don't know about you guys. Sometimes if I had to record a video, again, I want it to make it perfect. It doesn't have to be perfect. Obviously, do your best on it, but you don't have to record it 5 times, 6 times trying to get that perfect phrase. Obviously, you want to practice it ahead of time. Obviously, you want to put your best foot forward, but don't feel like if you messed up slightly, just kind of keep moving on. It's kind of like you're doing a dry run through of your non-technical piece, basically during the actual assessment. So there's a couple of things that it helps us with. One is basically it lets us see how you it's kind of like a little bit of a record saying, oh, this is what your non-technical piece looked like. The other part of it too allows you to do a practice. So that way, when you're coming into the assessment, you feel a little more comfortable about actually presenting that non-technical piece. Okay. Cool. So any questions on that? Cool. All right. Awesome. So yeah, again, go through unlearn that project piece and kind of seeing how that runs through. If you have any questions, of course, we have next week. We have office hours, so definitely ask that on the Slack. Definitely, you guys can use it to support. Obviously, the project's going to be your own work, but you're welcome to help each other out, in however ways, giving each other advice or asking each other's questions and stuff like that. Cool. All right. So a couple things. So this kind of goes into section 12, and like I said, I like to view section 12 as kind of like a kind of a walkthrough of what the project might look like. It's much more, to be perfectly honest, it's much more like if you're in a professional setting, what that would look like as you're walking through. So there's a couple ways you can kind of think of it. We have the overall data science life cycle, which has a general feel to it. But all those things are very in a sense fuzzy. There's not you have to go here and then once you go to the next part, you can't go back. It's much more what's it called, fluid in that way. And so there's a couple ways you can kind of approach data science and procedures. And know that these aren't the only ones on here. I only wrote about the couple ones that I think are, that I personally like using in the way I kind of like think of data science. And so I think I shared this out last time too, so that way you guys can look at it. The one is CRISP-DM, which I can never remember what it actually stands for. So if you guys look it up, you guys can check that out. But CRISP-DM, basically, it's the same idea. It's just the data science lifecycle, but in a certain structured order. Again, you start off with your business, basically your business, like who's this for? And we say business, that could also be nonprofit. That could be another, basically your customer, who you're doing data science for, right? And you have to say, you know, what kind of sources are available for you? Like what kind of data is available to you? Maybe the business has a lot of information, but maybe they don't have all the information. Is there other public sources that you could go get and use that and combine that with the data that you have? So these are kind of things when you're doing like an actual data professional, you know, working with another company or with just a team. Okay, and then knowing like what kind of problems can you actually address using that data. If your data are collected from, I always say like first graders, like say, oh, who's the most favorite, like who's the most favorite superhero character, and you ask it, your data only come from first graders, obviously that's going to limit the kind of questions you're going to be able to ask. So knowing where your data is originating from is a really important aspect of that part. Okay, and that kind of comes down to what later we'll talk about in Mod 2, basically about like knowing what your data are and like what kind of statistics you can do. Okay. So that, again, that kind of ties together, kind of flows through. Again, size, distribution, basically what predictors can you do? All those parts are important. If your data only look like about 1,000, you know, data points, that limits to like what extent you can actually dig into it. And then also after doing predictive modeling, after doing analysis, it's going to limit to say, how reliable do you think this data represents what you want to talk about? So that's, again, something you always keep in mind. Basically, you can think of it like, there's a saying like garbage in, garbage out. If you have garbage data coming in, you will only be able to say so much. So always knowing where your sources are from is a really important part, okay? And then your data prep, this is from the CRISP model, right? Basically, that's your data cleaning. You can hear it data cleaning, data scrubbing. Sometimes people call it like wrangling as a combination of gathering data and cleaning your data. But your data prep, basically, you can think of it like you're looking for missing values, which are probably the most prevalent thing you'll see. You'll see that they're just missing values that just either someone put an input in there or it's implied that it's supposed to be some other value. But of course, when you try to use something like Pandas, you try to import that data, it's going to say a NaN, right? And basically, those are values you have to figure out. It's like, okay, it's missing, but what should I do with this? Should I replace it with some value? Does it make sense to make it, for example, 0? Does it make sense to make it the median, the mean? Does it make sense maybe like there's not very much data in this column? So for example, let's say, you know, they were collecting a bunch of information and only like 4 of the data points actually have that value. Maybe it doesn't make sense to do predictive modeling. Maybe it doesn't make sense to do analysis on there, and you drop actually that whole column. And that's actually a really important part too, because sometimes by basically, if you have missing values, that can tell you something interesting about how your data were collected. So it could be, for example, if your data were collected over long periods of time, maybe that column wasn't actually being recorded before, and it was just now recently being recorded. So if you were to try to keep that in there and not realize and not think about those aspects, it could possibly be that, oh, even though that data is filled out, it's actually telling you something else. It's telling you that maybe that data is more recent. So those are things that you kind of have to think. And there's not a hard and fast rule of exactly when you should keep something, what you should translate it to. Do you translate it to 0? Do you translate it to the median? Do you translate it to the mean? Do you translate it to the mode? What's the most common value in there? You have to figure out what makes the most sense in the context of the data. Okay? And this is why data cleaning can take such a long time, because you're just trying to figure out exactly what's going on. A classic one too, again, conversion, basically trying to make sure you have the right, what's it called? Like if it's read as a string versus a number. So this classically happens in Pandas, because Pandas can only say in one particular column, because it's a NumPy array, it can only say, is this an integer? Is this a float? Is this a string? So if there's, for example, let's say all your stuff is a bunch of numbers, and then someone puts in, like, spells out the number 1, like O-N-E, it'll read as a string. The whole thing is a string, and you can no longer do, if you read it like exactly like that, you couldn't do anything with, I mean, you could do like categorical values and stuff like that, but really you want it as a number. So you have to find those pieces and see what makes sense. And this is where obviously doing, doing a dot describe, doing, if sometimes in the case of missing values or really extreme outliers, plotting your data, doing a scatter plot. Pair plot in Seaborn, which we've seen a few times, is a really useful tool because it can make you see a bunch of data very quickly and see what things make sense and where you might need a categorical variable versus something that's more supposed to be a continuous variable. So those are things that you'll see like as you're doing kind of exploring and actual cleaning, okay? And so again, I'd say like, for this project in particular, you'll probably, and this is true for most data science, the data cleaning part is probably gonna take the most amount of time because there's so many different ways you can kind of look at the data and make sure you find everything you need. But then once you have that, usually that ends up moving into more model prediction. And that can take quite some time, but in my experience, usually the data cleaning is probably the longest time. And then once you get the data cleaning part, then you can start doing the model prediction. And for us, it's going to be linear regression at this stage. In the future, we can do more advanced techniques like machine learning models and stuff like that. But for right now, we're doing multiple linear regression and knowing, for example, do you want a hot encoding for a categorical? Do you do a continuous, are you using a continuous variable? Have you just decided, maybe this feature needs to be dropped, whether it's because like there's a lot of missing values or, for example, multicollinearity, where values are very, very, are closely related to each other. At this stage right now, we haven't really talked about how to address multicollinearity. In my opinion, we kind of like wave your hands, like, know that some variables can be related to each other. But as we go in more advanced techniques, for example, in Mod 2, we'll see ways to make sure we have, more techniques to figure out, to make, feature creation, basically feature selection. You can create new features from parts that were related to each other. But again, we're not at that stage. So I think for this project, the big thing is to check the multicollinearity. And if you see parts that are very related to each other, kind of squint your eyes and say, does it make sense for me to include both of these features? And sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't, but at least being aware of it. And then also, you can write that in your notebook. It's actually, say like, oh, I found these parts are correlated, but I'm going to keep it for this reasons, or I'm going to drop it for these reasons. That's something you can describe as you're kind of going through. The way I kind of look at the notebook is that you kind of think of it like a script. So someone else can pick it up and start running through exactly what you're doing and seeing what your logic is. That's the nice thing about having Markdown within your code itself. Okay. And then of course, your last steps are basically your evaluation, checking that, how well does your model actually work? This is cross-validation, for example, what you would have. And then we don't really have that too much into the project, but you can do that kind of stuff. It's a little more advanced technique. If you need help with that, definitely reach out. Use those office hours and stuff like that. Okay. And then of course, this is more for the professional side. This is less of our project, our deployment. Usually when you have your predictive model, you don't say, cool, I did my predictive model, I'm done. Usually you want to do something useful for that, for the business. Sometimes that's actually combining it with other ways for them to use that information. So for example, they could automate those parts, or you can have something like an API where you use that modeling, and then you can use that model to create an API to say, oh, ask some information and pass it back. So it all depends on the business, and that's what the deployment part is. Okay. And then there's a couple other ones that are on the curriculum that talk about what procedures. Another one is awesome. And awesome, I always never pronounce it like the same way every single time, but OSEMN. The curriculum puts an I in there. I don't usually see I usually see it MN, but to each their own. And it's the same process there. You can see obtaining data, scrubbing/cleaning data, exploring and visualizing your data, modeling, then interpreting. It's all the same data science lifecycle. It's just a different procedure of like how to keep yourself in check to make sure, like that you're doing each step, that you're going through it logically and sequentially. Okay, cool. Any questions about these two guys? A little bit like any step that seems confusing or you're not quite sure what I was talking about? All right, cool. Thumbs up, yeah? Cool. All right, so again, I wanted to show you guys a few things that you can do for when you're actually going through your data. For example, when you're scrubbing, and you'll hear scrubbing or cleaning. I'll usually use the term cleaning. You'll notice that data scientists must really hate data, because we'll say like dirty data, mining data, and then we'll talk about cleaning and scrubbing. They're kind of like these dirty terms because it's kind of saying that it's It's not processed yet. It's not ready to do any modeling for it. But one process you can do is when you're doing your scrubbing is you can convert your columns that you import into Pandas. You can change it to different types. So for example, usually you'd want to change it to an integer or a float. You can do this dot as type right here. And that basically you can append that to the column. The curriculum shows examples of this. But these are things that I have used a lot frequently. And these are things that you might want to double check. So I kind of have this as kind of like a little guide saying, oh, these are some good things, some little quick parts of the script that you might want to focus on. So, and then another one is just checking how many null values is NA basically, right? How many missing values. And you can see for that specific column or for that specific data frame, how many things are actually missing. And that can give you a good clue. If 90% of your data is missing in that column, that might tell you something about that. It's like, hey, like, is this important for me to keep? Because maybe it's not actually going to help my model. Or it could be something like, hey, like, oh, there's missing values in this because it should be this. Or, you know, you can decide, and it all depends on context and what makes sense at the time. Okay. Again, part of your scrubbing, your collinearity, see what, and that's kind of like that's a little more of exploration. But you can see that's kind of part of your cleaning your data too, deciding if you're going to keep a feature or not. So just recognize that those parts are fluid. There's not a strict like, oh, this is cleaning and this is exploration. They can always go back and forth. And sometimes you'll explore and you're like, oh, wait, I didn't realize this was, you know, that our data looked like this. Okay, we need to go back and actually change parts of it. So just know that you'll kind of go back and forth a little bit sometimes. Okay. And then exploration, I love using histograms. Just doing a .hist. It just quickly gives you a quick show what the distributions are, what everything looks like. It gives you, again, I like to say, it's like humans are really good at finding patterns visually. You should definitely visualize your data. And these are very quick ways to visualize your data. You don't have to go into full matplotlib mode where you're going to like tweak everything. Obviously, if you're presenting to someone, you do want to do those things. But when you're exploring, you're just kind of doing some quick things. You're not caring about the axes. You're just seeing like, you know, let me look at what the data look like. All right. So again, scatter plots, box plots, which I noticed that a lot of people don't tend to do box plots. I personally really like box plots because box plots allow you to see a lot of metrics for the statistics. So you can see your middle 50%, you can see your mean, you can see any outliers very quickly. So again, I would suggest doing a box plot because then it can quickly, it can give you a lot of information very quickly. And again, scatter plots, I love scatter plots because you can actually see, like it's a little easier to see exactly where things are. You can quickly see if something's linear or not linear. You can see, for example, if it should be treated as a categorical value. If you see your values in your scatter plot all lined up along one, you know, certain values, you know immediately like, oh, this might need to be categorical, or maybe it makes sense to do something else. Okay. Again, filtering, one-hot encoding. As you guys probably remembered from last time, hopefully you guys remember from last time, usually a good idea is to do the one-hot encoding after you do your scrubbing and cleaning and visualization, just because if you try doing one-hot encoding of your data and then try to do a visualization, you just have a lot of different, you know, like basically if you do like dummy encode, like dummy variables, you basically have a new column for each of those variables and it's just harder to visualize. So usually I would say like stick that to the end, you know, but if you find something that's supposed to be categorical and you do need to do one-hot encoding, you take a note of that and just save that to the end to actually do that process before you actually go into the modeling, which is why we do one-hot encoding, is to do the modeling better, okay? And then of course our modeling right here. Oh, I made a mistake here. I don't know why this is box plot. But first step is like try a model. Just see what happens first, right? Do a simple well, in this case, we're only having like a linear regression. So like in that case, we're only having so many tools. But as you get into more advanced parts, always start with linear regression, unless it doesn't make sense, like there's too many variables or something like that. Just because sometimes linear regression is all you really need. And then you don't have to waste the time of basically like, if we talk about like deep learning models and stuff like that. If you can do it with linear regression and you can feel pretty confident with your linear regression model, then maybe that's all you need and start from there. Or at least then, even if you don't end at linear regression, you now have a base model. Say, hey, we did linear regression with this kind of accuracy. You know, now can we go more advanced techniques? How much more can we improve from linear regression? So that's a good thing to always do. And I write here visualize. Visualize your model. So in this case, linear regression. Always have something that can help you visualize and see how well your model is doing. I think that's always a really useful thing because it helps connect, not just for you, but also if you need to show it to anyone else. is that way you can say, hey, how accurate is this thing? People just aren't naturally built to look at numbers. People like visuals. We like seeing things. We like to see things summarized in a visual. Of course, know that any visual that you do will always be a summary of whatever the data actually are. But it helps you also realize what that, it can help you build that relationship with the actual numbers itself. Okay. And then let's see here, a couple things I put in here. Which features actually matter? So this one's kind of important too. Like I said before, is that if you have collinearity, if you have a bunch of features that are all related to each other, you're going to basically essentially double count those features on your model. So that's important to realize. But also, when we talk about like our features, when you get your linear regression and you get those coefficients are basically telling you how much weight each part has, or each part basically weighs towards. So one important thing that you can do, it's not required for linear regression, but you can basically do standardization scaling, basically try to make your values so they're all very similar to each other. And that way, when you actually look at the coefficient factor, the coefficient for that specific feature, you can get an idea of what the relative weight is. If your values, for example, range for one part, let's say like 1 through like 10, and another one goes from like 100,000 to 1,000,000, obviously the linear regression will try to essentially make that part smaller for the, what's it called? Like for, let's say that 100,000 to 1,000,000, and then it'll make that part really big. So it's hard to compare those coefficients because they're not on the same scale. So that can be really useful in that sense of seeing how they go through. And what's nice is that linear regression doesn't rely on standardization. Note that other models, more advanced models, like some machine learning algorithms, do rely on those kind of standardization and scaling. And they're very sensitive to if things are not exactly scaled with each other. If, for example, one has a huge range of values, another one has a small range of values, that can affect your model greatly. But for linear regression, for the most part, it's not too much of a concern. It's more like for the readout to understand what the readout's actually telling you. Okay? Okay, cool. And then, of course, interpret it, like I said, pictures, visuals, plots. They basically are a great summary, and honestly, just people trust more like when you have a visual. It just feels more real. And again, you can find patterns when you're actually doing analysis and stuff like that. And it can help summarize, especially for non-technical people. If you throw a bunch of numbers at a non-technical person, they might try to play along and say, oh yeah, I know what that is. But in reality, they might just be like, I have no idea what's going on here. So a visual can really help them kind of solidify what you're trying to say. Okay. And then, so first of all, any questions on anything I kind of walked through? Anything that you see on here that's confusing or you don't know about? Cool, thumbs up then, yeah. All right. So one thing I'll kind of point out is that it's in the student resources. I thought Raphael did a really good job. One of the other instructors does a kind of a walkthrough of like what a project might look like, kind of like starting into it. Obviously, it's only an hour, so he's not doing the whole project, but kind of like seeing like what the logic is of, what things you do, what do you explore, how do you clean these variables. So I kind of linked that in here too, but it's also in the student resources, but I thought I'd point that out. Okay. So that kind of leads me into more advice about the project in particular. This is kind of all general advice for the project, but first of all, use Markdown. If you're going to talk, some people say like, how much do you put in a comment versus how much do you put in like kind of like the Markdown, like the writing stuff like that. Usually I say if it's a comment is really explaining your code, saying like what the code is doing at a very high level. But if it's something that you're talking about, like why you're doing something, in particular about the data, saying like, why are you dropping this value or what patterns you notice, it makes more sense to make as a markdown just above your code. So I usually like make a little paragraph or maybe a couple sentences, just to say like, oh, this is what I'm going to do. Like, for example, say, oh, I'm dropping these values because it doesn't make sense for this data. It looks like it was a mistake. So I'm going ahead and dropping this part. Or, if I see a visualization like a scatter plot, I might say in my basically in the markdown saying, oh, I can see that there's basically, this is not a linear, this data is not linear. I might have to do a transformation. I might have to use a different kind of model than a linear regression. So those are the kind of things that you'd put in there in your, as you're walking through your data in your notebook. Okay. And then I just put some notes on here about formatting and stuff like that. For example, doing a horizontal line, you can see that kind of gray line right here. You're bolding, italics, doing quotes and stuff like that. These are all just to help you just better describe or better explain stuff so it's easier to read and stuff like that. Again, headings and stuff like that. These are hopefully things that you already caught up on, kind of reminding you about some of the stuff that you can do. This right here might be useful if you want to specifically talk about some code. You probably won't do this too often depending on what you're doing, but know that you can basically quote code. So you don't have to actually run it, but you can show what it looks like. And then of course links, for example, if you want to put pictures in there. And usually pictures obviously something that you actually want to emphasize on your stuff. Okay. So again, some extra stuff on here, like formatting for Markdown. Let's see here. So this is one thing I did want to point out. It's kind of in the bottom here, very unceremoniously put in there, but I think it's important. One thing is when you're doing this stuff, like I like to think like you're kind of a detective and you're kind of, it's kind of dirty, right? Like you're going all this stuff, you're throwing things over here, testing things out, maybe running a cell block up here, then going back down, then going back up, then going back down. If you do this, you know, especially if you've been doing it for, like, let's say like you have like a really long session, like a 2-hour, 3-hour session of just doing the stuff because you got in the zone, it can be really dangerous for the sense that like you might accidentally run this code multiple times, which affects your results. So then what happens is if you try to do a restart and try to run your code fresh, it doesn't work anymore. It doesn't get the result that you're used to. So what I'll personally do, I'll try to kind of like do a mental timer of like 30 minutes to maybe even an hour long, and say at least every hour, I'll kind of stop myself and say, okay, let me go ahead and organize my work that I've been doing, make it more in a logical sense that someone can read it through and understand what I'm doing. So for example, if I'm doing some, you know, cleaning and then exploration and then cleaning again, I might organize it so I do the cleaning first, maybe throw in a little exploration in there to explain why I'm doing this part, and then going forward. And then what you can do, you do a kernel restart. So you basically start your whole kernel fresh and then run it all the way from the top to the bottom to make sure that it does work the way you intend it. Because the worst thing you can do is that you do all this work and then you run it from the very top and the bottom and it doesn't work anymore. And you're just like, I don't know what's going on. And then you have to figure that part out. So it's good to kind of take a little, like, I like to say like 30 minutes to like maybe an hour to take a break and make sure the code's working and you can reorganize it. Okay. So cool. So that's kind of like my general advice. Obviously we have our 2 weeks, I mean, breaks in the middle, but we have next week to kind of talk about, you know, anything you guys come across. Obviously finish your sections now, you know, if you're still on section 11, you know, which is totally fine. Just know that you should go through that first. Don't feel like you need to jump into the project right now. Get through that part because you're going to have to go back onto multiple linear regression anyway. So make sure you kind of walk through everything like that. But again, our sections, our normal study groups are going to be replaced with office hours, which means you guys get to ask questions. I won't have anything particularly planned unless you guys want me to. And that's all there is. Any questions you guys have about anything I talked about, anything about the project? Cool. All right, how are we feeling about the project? Thumbs up? Thumbs down? Side? All right, cool. All right, you guys are enthusiastic. That's good. All right, cool. Yeah. And then Eli, I don't know if you've been listening in. Is there anything that you want to add that I might have missed?
Thank you.
Always, Eli. Always.
It was fantastic. I'm so proud of you.
Oh, thank you. I learned from the best.
No,
And you.
No comment. But it's so good to see you guys. You guys are growing up. Oh my God. First module, final project. This is so exciting. Yeah. Before you know, you're talking like data scientists, you'll be doing like data scientists, and this is fantastic. This is very useful information. And you've got a fantastic instructor. You folks, I can't see what you folks come up with. Cool.
Thank you. They are, I know, they're growing up so fast. It's really funny. I think I mentioned to you guys before, in my mind, I think like, you know, like, oh, my kids. And it's like, oh, you guys aren't like, you guys aren't kids. Like some of you guys are older than me, you know, but I really do like, you know, I love seeing that, how much you guys have done so far. And it's always exciting to see what the projects will bring. So cool. All right, guys. I guess I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen now. And, oh, I guess I can stop recording. Okay.